it's time to introduce you to my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh card of old. No, I am not kidding. It is actually Time Wizard, and this deck actually uses Time Wizard kind of seriously. So without further ado, it's time for Witchcraft! Hello folks, I'm the Ghost with Knife, and welcome back to more Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. The Time Travel 2004 event may be gone, but we are not done traveling in time just yet, because today we are using, and I'm serious, a Time Wizard deck, as you saw in the intro. And today's deck is a really spicy one. So Time Wizard by himself is not a great card. He's very little attack and defense. He's a spellcaster level 2, but once per turn, you can toss a coin and call it. If you call it right, destroy all monsters your opponents control. If you call it wrong, destroy all of your monsters and take damage equal to half of their attack points, which is a very high risk, high reward card. So how do you turn this really janky old card into a powerful asset to a spellcaster deck? Well, it's pretty simple. You use super polymerization. Now, I know some people are scratching their head going, okay, I get it. I don't actually get it, but allow me to explain. Super Polymerization, as you can see, you discard one card, fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your side of the field or your opponent's side of the field in order to fusion summon any monster, and you cannot counter this card in any way, shape, or form. Why in the world are we using this with Time Wizard? Well, it's pretty simple, because Time Wizard has a fusion monster called Time Wizard of Tomorrow, which is fusion materials or Time Wizard in any effect monster. So essentially, if you can get Time Wizard out and Super Poly, you can Super Poly away your opponent's core combo pieces and just get yourself a nice big fat spellcaster that can potentially end the game by destroying all monsters on the board and making somebody take half of their total attack and damage, which is a really funny card indeed. And in order to combo this with some other potential really powerful Super Poly targets, we've got Mud Dragon, the Swap or Moo Dragon, Garuda, we've got the Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, and a Predaplant Drago Stapelia. These are our main Super Poly targets. Now I know what you're thinking, that alone does not make a deck. You can't just slap Super Poly and some targets in there and Verte Anaconda to get Super Poly off. You're right. So instead, we're doing another deck that I've wanted to do for quite a while. We're doing Witchcrafters. Now, these are more spellcaster monsters with all sorts of different elements, but the game plan with these cards is that you tribute your Witchcrafters to get into your big Witchcrafters, so you can reuse your spells in a general kind of recursion strategy, because at the end phase, during your end phase, if you control a Witchcrafter monster, if it's in your graveyard, you can scoop it right back to your hand, and you can use one of their active effects, either the one that they activate, or they go back to your hand once per turn. So it gives you this nice, kind of grindy, long game you can play with your opponent, and that's some really powerful monsters like Golem Oruru, Madame Vere, Witchcrafter Hane, which in my opinion is one of the better ones, and a lot of the smaller ones allow you to discard a spell and special summon one of the bigger ones from your deck so you can get your engine going. And the main game plan of this deck is to end on Vice Madame, an incredibly powerful fusion monster that's essentially a frickin' custom card. It has a bunch of effects. Whenever a spell card or a non-fusion spellcaster monster effect is activated, and it allows you to just do a bunch of nonsense, and it's a pretty good card in general. Outside of our main deck Witchcrafter monsters, we've got Cup of Ace. A friend helped me build this, and they insisted I put Cup of Ace in the deck. It is a spell you can technically discard to your Witchcrafters. That's the main reason I kept it. And also, it's Pot of Greed if you're really, really lucky. And we're already flipping coins. Why not flip some more? We've got Magicalized Fusion to help us get into our Madame Vere. 3 Witchcrafter Creations, 3 Witchcrafter Holidays, a single copy of Lightning Vortex, a Witchcrafter Confusion Confession, 3 copies of the Secret Village of the Spellcasters. It is important you get down a Spellcaster before you play this, otherwise this turns off your deck. Very important that you do that. 2 copies of Witchcrafter By Street, 2 copies of Super Poly, 2 copies of Called by the Grave, 1 copy of Witchcrafter Draping, 2 copies of Unveiling, 3 copies of Imperm, and 2 copies of Patronus. Now, notice that there is no Droll, there's no Ash Blossom, because this deck really wants to focus on its Witchcrafter aspect, which is why we're going to be going into casual games with this deck. Outside of these, we got some other kind of non-important monsters. We got Underworld Goddess, in case we need her. But yeah, that is our Witchcrafter and Time Wizard deck. So let's get right into those replays and show you just what kind of magic you can pull off with power of witchcraft and time. Alright, so our first game with the deck is as follows. We've got the Almighty Time Wizard, an Eagle, 2 creations, and a Secret Village in our hand. We're going to go ahead and use the creation to grab a Smita, because Smita is one of the better monsters. Then after playing Smita, we're going to go ahead and use the Secret Village effect. And now our opponent cannot activate spell cards. Hooray! And they're going to be setting 2 cards and passing. We're not going to use Smita's effect just yet. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to activate Ginny's effect to discard the creation from hand. And then our opponent's going to max C like a terrible person, because, you know, that's just what they do. They're going to draw 1 card off of us here, which is kind of a bummer, but we do have the almighty Madame Vere. And then my opponent is going to Needleworm us, which is one of the worst things you can do, because the more spells we get in our graveyard, the more of our Witchcrafters, the more of our recursion effects we can get. Like adding an Imperm to our hand, and then discarding a card from our graveyard, putting our Witchcraft creation back into our hand, so that way we can use it for Smita's effect, which is going to special summon more nonsense. And our opponent just can't handle the Witchcraft, so they're gonna scoop it on up and get right on out of here. Alright, getting into our next game here, we've got a pretty fun hand here. Time Wizard, Madame Vere. We're gonna go ahead and use the creation to grab ourselves a Smita. And the Smita's gonna activate. Our opponent... Sorry about that. Our opponent's gonna try to affect Valor or Smita, because Smita is one of our big cards in the deck. Because we can tribute it, discard a spell card, and special summon any Witchcrafter monster from our deck except Smita, and then from the graveyard we can banish her, and all of our smaller Witchcrafter monsters have an effect once you banish them from the graveyard. C allows us to send any Witchcrafter card from our deck to the graveyard, which, as you know from the last game, will allow us to have more stuff we can recur back to our hand, so we can keep recycling our cards and grind out our opponent. But my opponent is going to try to affect Valor Smita here. But as you're about to find out, our opponent's about to find out, it's a quick effect, so we can just go ahead and use it. We're going to go ahead and use the Buy Street to go ahead and summon one of our big Witchcrafter monsters, Witchcrafter Hane, which is our once-a-turn pop by discarding a spellcaster, and our opponent cannot target any other spellcasters with card effects as long as Hane is out. She's also got a nice beefy stat line, so she is very much ready to go. We're going to use Smita's effect to put another card into our graveyard. It's going to be our Confusion Confession. Now, Witchcrafter Buy Street is actually a really fun card, because it comes back to the field instead of into our hand at the end of the turn. And we can use this card from the field as though it was a spell in our hand for our Witchcrafter effects, which is a very powerful effect. We're going to go ahead and get our Confusion Confession back, which is our main way of fusing into the Vice Madame. Our opponent plays their first card. It's an At Ignister, which I've never seen this deck until this game. Basically, this deck likes to special summon a bunch of monsters to link summon to really, really powerful monsters, including the Dark Infant of At Ignister, which is going to go ahead and get them their AI Land, which AI Land is a not once per turn field spell. And you control no monsters in your monster card in your main monster zone. You can special summon 1 level 4 lower At Ignister monster from your hand, but for the rest of the turn you cannot special summon monsters with the same attribute as by the effect of AI Land. And you cannot special summon monsters except Cypress monsters. So the Cypress locks you and attribute locks you, so you can't do one of the exact same attribute. Because a lot of Ignister monsters, Cypress monsters with a bunch of different attributes, they're going to go ahead and go into Baruru, which allows them to send an Ignister monster from the deck to the graveyard. They're going to go ahead and special summon another Ignis monster, so they can get off their big Dark Templar at Ignister. This guy is pretty nasty. He's an ultra rare, and he even has an animation. 3 monsters with different names. If you special summon to a zone, if a monster is special summoned to a zone this card points to, which is all the zones behind it, even during the damage step, you can special summon as many level 4 or lower At Ignister monsters from your graveyard as possible to zones this card points to, but their effects are negated. And also, whenever it destroys an opponent's monster at battle, you can special summon 1 Cypress monster from your graveyard. Basically, this guy is a way of extending your plays. So we're going to go ahead and use Hane's effects, get rid of the Confession, and get him on out of here. But this is when I find out that Ignister AI Land is not once per turn. My opponent summons this card, which basically is Karibo, but then my opponent summons this card, Gachiri, at Ignister, which is a card that I should have read, and I regret not doing it. The first time each Cyber monster you control will be destroyed by a card effect, it is not destroyed. I do not read this, which you will find out on my turn. My opponent is going to try and bring back their Dark Templar, but we're going to go ahead and called by the grave him right on out of there. No thank you, I do not want you extending any further. My opponent is then going to have a nice 3000 defense monster on board. We're going to go and use Hane's effect to try to destroy the Gachiri, which doesn't work, and then we're going to summon the Time Wizard. Again, I didn't read this card. I thought it was once per turn. You just protect a Cyberse monster. I didn't know it was the first time each Cyberse monster. Otherwise, I would have just probably not done this in the way that it did, but it worked out in the end anyway, because Time Wizard is going to be calling heads, and we're going to get the heads, and we're going to get Gachiri right on out of here, which is going to make sure their cards, one face-up monster your opponent controls is unaffected by your opponent's card effects until the end of your opponent's turn. So basically they're trying to protect this, which doesn't really matter because I'm going to beat over it with a Time Wizard. That's right, Time Wizard just killed a monster. You have seen that clip for yourself. Now Hane's going to get in some damage. We're going to recur all of our spells here. Go ahead and get back our Creation, our Holiday, our Confusion Confession, and now we have a bunch of cards that can do a bunch of things in our hands, and our opponent is going to get their FAI Fighting Spirit to start their combo. They're going to go ahead and try to get another monster, and then they're going to use their quick play spells to special summon an Ignister monster from the graveyard, but I'm going to use Hane to get rid of Picari so they cannot link summon off of this, or at least hopefully enough. My opponent is going to go into Doshin, and they're going to go for their Love Fusion, and that is going to end their turn for now. I don't have a game on board, but they have a face-up effect monster, and I have a Witchcraft Recreation, which is going to allow us to go into Jenny, which we're then going to use to link off with Hane, so we can summon Verte Anaconda, and you know what comes next. We activate Verte's effect, lose a bunch of life points for a Super Poly. Time Wizard Induction at Ignister is going to turn into the almighty Time Wizard of Tomorrow. You may be able to link off monsters now, but tomorrow is here. We're going to use Jenny's effect to go ahead and activate. We're going to banish her to activate one of our spells from the graveyard, which is going to allow us to add Golem Aruru to our hand. Golem Aruru is a very powerful card that allows us to, whenever an opponent activates a card or effect that targets a spellcaster you control, guess what? The Time Wizard and Time Wizard of Tomorrow are spellcasters, so we can use it for that. Or they target any of your spellcasters for an attack. As a quick effect, you can target one card your opponent controls or one Witchcrafter spell in your graveyard, special summon this from your hand, and if you do, return the targeted card to the hand. Basically, Aruru allows you to protect your spellcasters from an attack or an effect, and then bounce your opponent's monster back, and then beat them back with a 2800 beater. It is a very powerful card. Our opponent is going to go for the AI Love Fusion, fusing off our Verte Anaconda with their Ignister in hand for an Earth Golem at Ignister, which I didn't even realize they could do. Oh, whoops. This card is pretty big. Just some nonsense. It's also going to be beating our Time Wizard with an attack, but Aruru comes in and protects the Time Wizard of Tomorrow! So Golem Aruru has shut down all forms of offense they could have had. This game is over. Aruru goes in, and the Time Wizard of Tomorrow sends our opponent back to the future. I love this deck. Alright, let's get on into our next game here. We're going to go ahead and set our Witchcraft for Patronus face down, which allows us to shuffle our Witchcrafters from our graveyard back into our deck, and then add a Witchcrafter spell from our deck to our hand, which is a very powerful trap, a great way of continuing our grind and recursion game. We're going to go ahead and use Jenny's effect, discarding another spell card. Then we're going to be special summoning Witchcrafter Smita. Now, why I did this, I'm not quite sure. I think I was learning the deck at this time. But yeah, we have a Smita, which allows us to get into a Hane if need be, and our opponent is going to set 3 and summon a Time Lord. Which is it's a bit of a problem. It can't be destroyed by card effects or battle. It takes no battle damage from attacks involving this card. At the end of the battle phase, if this card battled, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the attack of one monster your opponent controls that this card battled until the end of the turn. This card is going to be a problem, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use Smida's effect to summon a Madame Vere, so I have a lower attack monster, so that if they want to burn me, they do less damage. We're going to go ahead and use our Patronus to put our Smida back into our deck, grab a Witchcraft Creation, which we're going to be using next turn, hopefully. Drawing a Time Wizard, and we can discard a spell card, negate the effects of all monsters our opponent controls this turn. So now this thing can be destroyed in battle, but my opponent is going to summon Limit Me. Now I haven't summoned quite yet, but I'm going to go ahead and use the Patronus effect to shuffle my card back into my deck, and then my opponent is going to activate Curse of Darkness. Now this is where things get really tricky, because this card messes my day up. Every time a spell card is activated, after it's resolved, the player that activated that spell takes 1,000 damage. I am a spell-heavy deck, so this card is going to mess my day up. We're going to add a spell, but thankfully we can use our spells in unique ways to still get value out of them. We're going to attack with Madame Vere, and then they're going to Blazing Mirror Force us. But it's okay, because we got the Time Wizard. And as you see, we went for Tails. We got Tails. This thing's been negated by the Madam. Goodbye, Rathian the Time Lord! That's right, there is only one Time Lord in this world, and it's the Time Wizard. My opponent's gonna set 2, and I'm not going to draw a damn thing I can do here, so now it is time for everybody's favorite Time Wizard beatdown. 500 damage, but then they're going to Dimension Wall my Time Wizard, so I take 500. This game's a crazy one, I'm not gonna lie. My opponent has this incredibly hard to break through summon limit and a Curse of Darkness, but I do have the Witchcrafter Draping. This is a very, very powerful card that allows us to return our opponent's spells and traps back to their hand based off the number of Witchcrafters we control. We just gotta draw one at this rate. And we do grab one. We grab the Witchcrafter Pittore. We're going to attack with Time Wizard, attack with Pittore, and let the Time Wizard beatdown commence. We're going to go ahead and grab the creation back to our hand, which we can use with Pittore as well as the Unveiling. And this is going to really help us in the long run. We do have to discard our Patronus because we don't really need it in this moment in time. My opponent is going to summon a Swift Scarecrow, which has a blast in the past, into a Relinquished Anima. That's right. They have a Karibo, essentially, and they use Relinquished Anima to steal Pittore, and apparently they didn't read it's a quick effect. I'm going to go ahead and activate Pittore's effect so the Relinquished Anima gets nothing whatsoever, and we're going to summon the Hane, and Hane allows us to discard a spell. We're going to get rid of the Curse of Darkness, so now that we can actually play our cards and not be punished for it. And from here, our opponent's in trouble. We're going to put both of their spells, their face-down cards that are spells and traps, back to their hand. We're going to go ahead and use the Confusion Confession with a monster from our hand, Time Wizard, and the Jenny to summon the Time Wizard of Tomorrow! We're going to activate the Patronus to put the Time Wizard back in the deck, because Time Wizard is a spellcaster we can put back in the deck with Patronus. We're going to use the creation, grab the Smida. I don't think I've normal summoned yet. Go ahead and activate this effect to go ahead and get our Confusion Confession again, using Time Wizard and Smida to summon the Vice Madame. And I have game on board, and my opponent leaves the game. And that is the recursion power of Witchcrafters in action. Get out of here with your Time Lord and Relinquished nonsense, please and thank you. Alright, getting into our next game here, our opponent has some terrifying sleeves. That is a misjudge. I have seen that card do some scary things. Our opponent is going to be going first, activating Pot of Prosperity. We don't have Ash to stop it. Unfortunately, my opponent grabs a Trap Tricks, a Dice Jar, Infernal Queen Archfiend, Dimension Dice, and Dice Knight. Our opponent is playing a dice deck versus our Time Wizard Witchcrafter deck. What are the odds? They're going to summon the Dice Clops, or the Dice Lops, my mistake. Once per turn, roll a 6-sided die, then apply the result on a 1. Look at your opponent's hand and rip a card from it. 2, 3, 4, 5, discard a card, or discard your entire hand. Our opponent is going to roll a 1 and get rid of our mice, our Madame Vere, because of course our opponent can do that. They're going to activate Dimension Dice and summon Orgoth the Relentless, activating his effect, getting a 6, a 1, and a 4, which just gives them a nice little attack boost and 2 face-down cards. That's right, folks, we've got a spicy one for you today. We're going to summon the Time Wizard. Our opponent is going to Trap Trick to grab Blind Obliteration. Activate Blind Obliteration, rolling a 1 and a 2, killing the Time Wizard. I'm going to activate Witchcraft Creation to try to get something I can do here. We've got the Patronus face down and a Bystreet at the ready. Orgoth loses his attack boost. They can always re-roll it again. That's right, they use Blind Obliteration to get rid of the Time Wizard. That is how desperate they are and how terrified they are of Time Wizard and their dice deck. We're going to shuffle back the Madame Vere into our deck, grab our Confusion Confession. Orgoth is going to go for his rolls. A 5, a 1, and a 3. He does not get doubles or 3 of the same, so we're not worried about that nonsense. Go ahead and summon Smita with a face-down Infinite Impermanence. Going to go ahead and shuffle back the Time Wizard, grab our Witchcrafter Unveiling, use the Unveiling to summon Arura. We're going to use Smita's effect, discarding the Bystreet in order to special summon another monster from our hand, which is going to be the Witchcrafter Hane, special summoning Aruru, my bad. Using Hane's effect to discard our Confusion Confession, getting rid of Orgoth. Using Smita's effect to put one of our spells into the graveyard, which is going to be a card we haven't used, Witchcrafter Holiday. And from here, my opponent scoops. They may have thought they had the luck of the dice on their side, but I had the power of time and witchcraft tomfoolery. Alright, back into it with another one of our games with the beloved Time Wizard Witchcrafter deck. No Time Wizard in our hand this time, but we do have some fun Witchcrafter nonsense. But my opponent is playing Toll and Child's Play. That's right, it's a burn deck versus Witchcrafters. Now, I didn't really know what to think when I saw this, but I was like, dude, that's kind of spicy. We're going to use the Witchcrafter Unveiling, special summon the Hane from hand. They're going to gain some life points. We're going to go ahead and use this to get rid of their Child's Play. I probably should have gotten rid of Toll, to be fair, but I was more concerned with the fact that they wanted to gain life points over their Toll. So I went ahead and used the Witchcrafter Summons to summon myself a Smita to attack their monster, and it's a freaking Aroma Jar. Which can't be destroyed by battle while it's face up on the field after it gets flipped, and every end phase, you gain 500 life points. We're going to go ahead and grab back our Bystreet here. And from this position, we have to use Hane to destroy their Aroma Jar. My opponent activates another Toll, which is very annoying to deal with for the record. Get rid of the Aroma Jar. They have a little bit more life points over us, so we're going to have to try to beat down our opponent before these Tolls get too much value off. I'm going to go ahead and try to destroy one of the Tolls. I'm going to attack with Hane, pay 500 life points, and then get Dimension Walled yet again. I know, 2 Dimension Walls in one video. Who would have seen that coming in today's episode? We are behind on life points. This is when the Witchcrafters do their thing. We're going to get back all these juicy cards right here. Witchcrafter Bystreet's going to come back. 4 cards back from our graveyard. This is the value you get out of Witchcrafters and why I like the deck so much. And our opponent, at this point, sees what the writing on the wall. Hane is going to get rid of the other Toll. And from this point, I can just grind my opponent out of the game. And they scoop. Alright, getting into our last game here. This is going to be a very fun little last game because both me and my opponent are on some very spicy decks. My opponent is going to be going second. I summon the Pittore with a face down impermanent. I summon and I use the Bystreet's effect. And then I set a Super Poly because Super Poly is a good card and you should use it. So we've got the Pittore on the board. My opponent plays a Spider's Lair, which once per turn you can select a face-up insect-type monster you control while it remains on the field. Any opponent's monster that battles with one of those monsters is changed to defense position at the end of the battle phase. Basically, this is a nice way of stalling when they try to attack. When I try to attack their bugs, they use Shield Worm to mill one of our Witchcrafter monsters, which isn't a great effect. They're going to use their Spider's Lair on the Shield Worm, which means, like, if I battle this thing, then my monster is put back in a defense position and cannot change its battle position. This is a great way of making it so where, like, I can flood up my board with a bunch of nonsense and then not be able to attack. But my opponent is then going to, after using Spider's Lair, use Multiplication of Ants. Now, why didn't they use this after the ants? I'm not quite sure, but then they're going to be using that. They're going to be using Multiplication of Ants to get a bug into their graveyard, so that way they can banish it, so that they can summon the almighty Aztekapede, the Worm Warrior. And if it inflicts battle damage to me, they're going to mill the top card of my deck. They are a very weird bug mill deck with Multiplication of Ants. In response, I am going to Super Poly their Ants and their Aztekapede into a Garura. And my opponent can't really answer this from their current board state, but I'm going to use Patore's effect with the By Street to summon a Hane, and hopefully we can use that to clear out my opponent's board, because even though they're not doing great things with their board, it is still a terrifying board. Hane is going to attack another bug, and Garura is going to do 3,000 points of damage. We're going to grab back our By Street, grab back our Confession, and it's our opponent's turn. And my opponent plays Giant Ballpark. During damage calculation, if a player would take battle damage, you can make neither player take any battle damage from that attack. And if you do, special summon one level 4 or lower insect monster from your deck to the graveyard. Then if you if you send a normal monster this way, you can special summon any number of monsters with the same name as that monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard, which is terrifying. I've seen Giant Baltar do a lot of nonsense, especially from Duel Logs videos. I'm going to use my By Streak, my Hane, to get this nonsense card out of here. And my opponent's like, I'll be fine. I'll just summon Prickle Fairy in face-up attack mode. My opponent is on Shield Worm, Aztekapede, Prickle Fairy, Multiplication of Ants. Like I said, this is a very spicy deck my opponent is on, but sadly, my opponent doesn't realize the game is already over. I'm going to use Hane's effect to get rid of Prickle Fairy, but for a little bit of spice, we're going to summon the Time Wizard, and then Witchcrafter Confusion Confession to special summon the Time Wizard of Tomorrow. And we're going to style on my opponent with the Time Wizard of Tomorrow and exact damage for game. Although this might not have been the most difficult duel, it was definitely a fascinating duel to watch what my opponent was doing. And folks, before we get to the end card of this video, I wanted to share why this deck was the last deck in our video that we went up against, because what you're about to see is something very spicy. Our opponent is a very hot pepper, if you know what I mean, because our opponent's deck is bonkers. They've got Arsenal Bug, 3 copies of Prickle Fairy, 3 copies of Aztekapede, 3 copies of Cross Sword Beetle, which is a nice piercing damage card, 3 copies of Shield Worm for that mill, 3 copies of Retaliating Sea, which is actually really good against me, 3 copies of Bee Trooper Assault Roller, 3 copies of Doom Dozer, a copy of Queen Butterfly Damascus, 3 copies of Multiplication of Ants, 3 Ninjutsu Art of Mosquito Marching, which I didn't even know was a card, 3 Insect Armor with Laser Cannon, 3 Bug Matrix, excuse me, 3 Giant Ballparks, 3 Verdant Sanctuaries, 3 Insect Neglects, 3 Spider's Lair, 2 Giant Ball Games, 3 Spider Eggs, 3 Lair Wires, 3 Corrosive Scales, and a bunch of stuff that uses Insect in the rest of their extra deck. I told you this deck was wild, as they literally don't even have a dark monster for one of their monsters. Or is it this? Is it dark? No, that's not a dark. That's not a dark. Why do you have this? Whatever. It's over. We're done. Let's go to the end. Alright, folks, the ride is over. Thank you for joining us on the People Mover and our adventure through Tomorrowland. Please exit the vehicle slowly. Don't forget any of your bags or your kids or anything like that. And while you're out there going back to Tomorrowland, go ahead and stop by the Time Wizard tomorrow. Maybe he'll be able to give you an autograph and also tell you thank you for enjoying those games with us here in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. As you can see, I had a ton of fun with this pure jank deck. Being able to use Time Wizard in any sort of serious fashion is not something that I ever thought I would get to do, and I absolutely loved every second of this deck. I really like the Witchcrafters. I love the attrition-based kind of game plan that they have. I like all sorts of silly spells they can use and their own powerful spell cards that come in their kit. I really had fun with this deck, and this deck was an absolute treat to play and showcase for you guys today. And hopefully y'all at home can remember, never underestimate the Time Wizard, because not only can your opponent always call the flip and destroy your board with it, but you never know when somebody's got a Super Poly and they can Super Poly one of your effect monsters into the Time Wizard of tomorrow. And with that, I will see y'all in the next episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. So thank you folks for tuning in, and with that, I bid you goodbye.